Okay, the other thing we're going to work on is we're going to work on throttle maintenance. A lot of these little guys, they get tipped over, it jams the hand grip right up into the bar, and then it actually binds up that throttle, and it's not actually able to return in a proper fashion or rotate in that proper fashion. So if that happens, just go up and just check your kid's throttle, see if it's popping back, if it's not springy back, or if it's feeling really bindy. A lot of times you'll just take the hardware off the clasp right here, you'll separate it, then you can actually get in there, do some cleaning, maybe some crud's gotten up into the system, some dirt or just grime, that type of thing. A lot of times, if I know I'm maintaining my throttle quite a bit, I'll actually just take a light little film of grease in there and just make sure everything's nicely lubricated. So if we look on the back side right here of the throttle assembly, basically we're going to take these two pieces of hardware out right here, or we can just loosen them up if it's just too tight up on the handlebar. If it's just too tight, we can just sneak it back a little bit and take a little bit of distance off the handlebar, and that way it should free it up. If it's still feeling a little gravelly inside, just want to pull your boot back. I'll get this boot snuck back. They're usually a little tight. And this is actually your throttle cable adjustment, so we'll talk about that in a second. But you're going to pull your clasp apart. Maybe there's some crud in there, clean it out with a rag, maybe some WD, and then just you can start out fresh. Once you assemble it, then you're going to do your fine-tune adjustment right in here. This is the lock ring, so you loosen this, and then you'll do your fine-tune adjustment. Typically, you want maximum about 1/8 inch of free play in that throttle. If it's too much, then your pilot's really going to be trying to work that throttle to get any activation out of it. It's almost a kind of a throttle delay if it's not set up proper. Or if they want it nice and finite tight, you can set it up to where it's just right there, right at the front door, right when they're ready to twist that throttle. So just depends on how your pilot wants it. But a lot of times when we're seeing bound up throttles, it's because they've tipped over and that hand grip's popped a little too close to the handlebar. Okay, one of the things we want to actually maintain before we actually head out onto the track is brake fluids and levers. We want to make sure that we've got good fresh fluids in the system. Those levers are working properly. They're not binding up on us. So one thing I'd recommend is pull the reservoir caps off. If you've got a siphon container where we can actually bleed the system out, you can actually suck all that old grungy fluid out of the reservoir, put new fluid back in, then you can actually siphon it through the system and get it bled through a little more properly and cleaner, get all that crud out of the system. And then once you've done that and that system's working nice and crispy, then one thing I'd recommend doing is actually pulling your boots away, and you're gonna pull your levers off. Just remove your pins and then take a little bit of light grease, make sure there's no crud inside your levers. That way these things are working nice and smooth and nothing's squeaky or bindy, and it's always gonna be performing in a proper fashion. Same thing on our brake pedal as well. We want to make sure that this is lubricated properly, there's no binding up in the pivot point, and then you can bleed that system through, go through and bleed your brake system. That way you've always got solid brakes on the bike. I typically, about every 3 to 4 rounds, I'll actually flush my system again, because we're running the brakes pretty hard. If you know you've had a really hard race day and you're just on the binders the whole time, nothing wrong with flushing it out in between your rounds, and that way your pilot's ready to go out and charge and attack and just have some good performing brakes. Sometimes I kind of think of it as a little bit of a step ahead of other riders out there too, because not everyone takes the opportunity to do this. One thing you also want to take care of is your clutch. So typically when the brake fluid is starting to fade away, the clutch fluid's just right behind it. So good fresh clutch fluid, you can bleed it right off of your clutch slave cylinder off the system, and then it's going to be nice and proper for your pilot out there as well. So one thing we want to take a look at on our suspension is we want to make sure that it's clean, no crud's gotten up into the seals. I usually take a rag, and sometimes if they're really dirty, I'll take some cleaner and spray it on there. And you can actually sneak this behind your fork guard here. And you can just do a little polishing, get some of that crud that's way down at the bottom there and get it kind of licked out, especially behind. Or if you just want to take your fork guard off, I usually do. And that way you can see what's really going on there. Unfortunately, fork seals are they're kind of a wear item. So as you ride these bikes and work them really hard, sometimes you'll get little leaks in there. There are some ways you can actually maintain that seal and keep it lasting a little longer. Typically what you can do is you can actually move this lower dust seal out of the way just by sneaking it down with I usually use like a little jeweler's screwdriver, pop this down, or just a good good flat tip screwdriver, you're just gonna lower this dust seal down. That's gonna expose the oil seal that's up inside the fork itself. So once you've snuck this down, if you've got some little cleaner, I wouldn't recommend something caustic, maybe simple green or something like that, where you can kind of get some of that crud flushed up out from underneath the dust seal, or the oil seal, I should say. And then typically what you're gonna do is you're gonna dab a light ring of grease all the way around the fork seal, and this is gonna be with that dust seal below it. You're gonna dab a light little ring of grease all the way around that. And then once you've set that ring, then you're gonna do a couple light compressions on the fork and kind of get that shape set of the grease in just one solid ring, and then give it a good pop, and that'll suck all that grease right up into that oil seal. And hopefully that'll make it last a little longer. It does, these are a maintenance item. They do wear a bit, so we're working them pretty hard. And clean forks is definitely one thing that's gonna be a big saver on time and money, and just getting your pilot out there and on the track, or just going out and playing out in the world out there. So make sure you're keeping your fork seals clean and your fork legs clean, and that's gonna last you a long time on those fork seals. But do consider they are a wear item, and these things have to be serviced every once in a while. If you haven't had your fork sealed on your bikes, I would definitely recommend it. The fluids, they'll go a little stale, and it's definitely time to get some new fork oil in there, and that way that suspension is gonna be working proper for you or your pilot out on the mini moto season out there. So hopefully that helps out on the front suspension, and then it's gonna work for them a little more solid. So we're gonna talk about maintenance on the shock and make sure that it's in good working fashion, things we wanna look for on the shock as well, make sure nothing's going a little south on it. So one thing we wanna make sure that is okay on the shock is your seal head. Sometimes you'll start getting a little oil dripping down here, and it'll actually, if it gets really bad, it'll actually soak this entire bump stop, and then it starts becoming a little mushed out. So if you're seeing any fluid down here and it's starting to get a little soaked, it's just definitely time to replace that seal head in there. But as far as maintenance, just keeping it clean. If you can get in there, sneak in. If you've got any crud in there, some cleaner, good bio wash or simple green works out really well, where you can get all that stuff flushed out there. If you want to get really deep into it, you can actually physically remove the shock itself from the frame. We'll just pop the mud guard out of there. So you remove the bolts out. You do have to get up and remove some of the body work out. Then you can physically pull the shock out itself. You can get in there, do a lot deeper cleaning on it. I'm a firm believer in clean hardware is going to work for you a little proper. So it'll definitely last you a lot longer. And if there are any problems that do come up, you can spot them out a lot sooner too. So let's take a look over on the other side of the shock here, and we'll get a little visual on it. So if we take a look right here, we can see our adjustment points, make sure we don't have any crud or mud in all our fine-tuned adjustments. Same thing up here as well as on our compression adjusters. We want to make sure everything's all clean. If it looks dirty, clean it. Get your kids starting out on a fresh machine every time. One thing that we notice here at the shop that a lot of clients don't realize is your radiators can actually get mud packed. You're getting all that debris coming in from the front end area. Maybe it's a really hard, muddy day. Maybe you're just out in that moto and you're chasing someone and they're just flinging all sorts of crud at you. So one thing that we recommend doing is when you are washing the bike, try to get a pressure washer in here and back flush the radiator. That way it's pushing the material out in this fashion, and it can get all those fins all cleared out. Try not to stick your tip of the pressure sprayer right in there, but just always kind of glancing blows back from the back end. If you can, pull the plastics off, that's gonna even better. Make sure that you've got all your orifices for your carburetor and all that air box all plugged up before you're doing that. That way you don't get any moisture in the motor as well. So that'll definitely help out on the coolant, keeping things a little cooler. Make sure you've got plenty of coolant in the system as well. Sometimes these things can get tipped over, or maybe they can get a little hotter and push some of that fluid out that is trying to balance the system. So before you go out on first season rides, when you're starting to get into that mini moto season, I would definitely recommend running fresh coolant in the bike. That's gonna keep the bike a lot cooler, and it's just gonna keep things happier. Typically, there's a drain right on the bottom of the water pump where you can actually just take that bolt out. Keep a pan close, because as soon as you crack that radiator cap, it's gonna shoot out about 2 or 3 feet on you. So I'd recommend keeping that container close when you get that screw out. crack that cap a little bit, and then you can meter down, and it's not going to make a big mess on you. And so, little tip on that part. So, fresh coolant for the season. Get them rocking and rolling, he or she, whichever your pilot is out there tearing it up, and that'll just keep your engine a lot happier and keep it lasting a lot longer and protect your investment out there. So one of the things that can really affect handling and actually speed of the motorcycle is your wheel bearings. So a good way to check those is a lot of times I'll actually just spread the brake pads a little bit. That way there's a little more free play in that. And you can actually just take the back end of the bike, take the wheel, give it a little movement like that, see if you're getting any deflection from side to side, or you can go in this fashion, you can actually rock that wheel. If it's not rocking, it's fine, it's in good shape. If you are starting to feel some rocking or notching like that, it's definitely time to replace those wheel bearings. The other indicator is maybe just how easy does the bike freewheel roll. So if it's starting to feel like it's really kind of crunched up, maybe you've got something going on in one of the wheel bearings. That can actually slow down the process if you're trying to be competitive out on the track, and can actually cause more wear and tear as time goes on. Can start affecting the hub of the wheel. All these things just can compound exponentially in cost. So if you can catch things early while they're small little issues, awesome, catch them early. There are also some oil seals to keep the moisture out of the wheel bearings. So one thing I recommend doing is actually physically pull your wheel off, and you can take a little rag and clean out that oil seal, press your wheel spacer back in, put a little grease in there as well, and that way it's gonna keep some of that fluid out when you're riding in the wet, the mud, that type of environment. Even when you're spraying off the bike and keeping the bike clean too, that's gonna help out on those bearings. On that topic, when you are cleaning your bike with the pressure washer, try not to bear down directly into these wheel bearing sets. That can actually flush out the wheel bearings, and that can actually just do premature damage. So I'd recommend glancing blows. Good degreasers will help kind of break some of that product down before you get too crazy on it as well. Some of the things we need to kind of get an assortment of just to maintain our bikes. We've got a few chemicals out here. Typically, when I'm going to the track, I've got a nice little milk crate, and all this stuff's kind of strategically stashed away in it. So these are some of the basic chemicals that I'd recommend getting. A couple little smaller tooly items too. So, and we've seen some of this stuff. We've got our chain wax, keeping our chain maintained. Brake fluid, that way you can flush that out and keep everything nice and clean. Definitely some air filter cleaner and some air filter oil. That way you can keep that air filter a little happier, and it's gonna keep that engine lasting a lot longer too for you too as well. Let's see, we've also got some waterproof grease. Typically what I do, if it's just sitting on my bench, I'll actually cut a hole in the top here, and I've got a little acid brush, and that way I'll just keep that brush in there, and if I've got to dress any axles up or any bearings or anything like that, that's gonna help you out, and just a nice little waterproof grease, and then you're good to go on that. Works good for all your axle bearings. You can get up in your headstock bearings. If you want to really dive into it, you can actually remove your swing arm and your pivot bolts on your swing arm, any areas in your shock. This stuff works great for, so very universal on that. Your standard WD-40, in case you've got anything binding up, you need to kind of break some of those bolts loose. I also have some penetrating oil as well that if things have gotten a little too bound up, I'll actually use some penetrating oil on it. Got your coolant. Typically the 3.0 coolant is what's coming standard in most of your off-road bikes in the KTM Husky gas family here. And then got a seal cleaner. This works really good for getting up inside your fork seals and actually cleaning some of this out. This is actually one that's a little more designed for some of the bigger bikes. They do have just some credit card styles. You can get up in there and clean some of that crud out of there as well. So I would definitely recommend a fork seal cleaner. If you've got air suspension, got your air pump, and then we've got our chain cleaner as well. And these are all just kind of your standard little things that will definitely help out on maintaining it. We talked about our chain clean here. This will really break up all that crud off of there. This works really good for even degreasing stuff too. It's a little more on the pricier end if you're going to use it for the entire engine. And just make sure you get the bike washed off too, because this can do a little discoloring on some of the plastics if you leave it on there too long. Then let's see. Moto Shine. After you've done all this stuff and maintain the bike, you want to make sure the bike is clean and nothing is looking too crudted out on it. A big advantage too on this is if it's a mud day, take this stuff and hose the crap out of the bike. Get it all up underneath. That way the mud's not going to stick on that bike. It'll flake off. Brian Green's son here, he actually won races just because of that strategy. Everyone was collecting mud up on their bikes, and he was running free and clear because they soaked his entire bike down with some cleaner. It actually fell all that mud off. So hopefully these little goodies will help out. Just kind of a little assortment of some chemicals you'll want to think about getting collected. And you know, it's I hear a lot of stuff. We do sell our electric bikes too. I love them. They're awesome. They're kind of a different creature. One of the biggest things that I hear is, well, I don't have the time to work on my bike and do some of this maintenance. This is the time you can spend that time with your young pilot and bond with them. Let them understand some of this mechanical thing that they're riding on and get that connection. So I'd really recommend that. Take that time to spend it with them. So hopefully this stuff helps out and get you into that first place podium out there on the season. One of the things we need to talk about, and hugely important on the bike, is oil. So if you're running competitive, these machines have very small oil containers on them, very small oil pans. I'd recommend if you're running competitive and racing competitive, change the oil after every race weekend. I know you can stretch them out a lot longer, but you're beating the snot out of these clutches and really pounding on them. And really, that's just going to give the engine a lot longer longevity. Oil's cheap, engines aren't. That's how I look at it. Even on my personal race bike, after every race weekend, I'll change my oil. That way I can start out with a fresh start every time I line up for the grid. So get that oil changed and get the air filters clean like we talked about before, and that's going to give you a huge advantage. And if you're just out bouncing around, you know, just keep an eye on it. Make sure that oil's staying clean. If you can't remember when you changed your oil, it's probably time to change that oil. Okay, one thing that's really crucial on our motorcycles is chain maintenance. This one's a brand new chain, so it's got plenty of lubricant on it. It's nice and fresh. But that's one of the things that we see that really destroys chains is actually not maintaining your chain. So easy ways to do it. I actually really like our drive chain cleaner. This stuff's amazing. You spray it on, you can actually watch all that grease melt right off the system. Chain brushes really help. That way you can get in here and really scrub up the chain, get it all clean. If you can, maybe a pressure washer where you can really push all that crud out and get all that system clean. I typically remove my chain, get it off, I'll scrub it up, get it in a little bucket with some cleaner, and that way I can start out fresh. And then you can actually lubricate it up in the air and get a little more detailed, make sure there's no bound up links, that type of thing. Sometimes these links will actually start to seize if they get a little dry and cruddy, so that'll give you a good visual if anything's starting to kink up on you. But you can do all this maintenance as it's on the bike too. If you don't have a stand like this, you can get the bike up on a crate. That way you can rotate that tire, and then you can do that clean in a little happier fashion. Once you've got the chain clean, then you're going to want to apply some chain wax to it. This is just one of the brands out there. This is what I like to use. It's chain wax. There is more of a clear chain spray that you can put on it too, but it typically flies off and makes a bigger mess. That's why I typically like to go with the chain wax on the bike as well. So once you've done all that, that's actually when I'm actually going to take the time to adjust the chain. So, because once the chain's free and everything's working nice and lubricated, then you can actually get a proper chain adjustment out of the chain as well. So typically on these bikes, with it sitting on the ground, you're going to be roughly about almost 2.5 fingers right behind the chain glide. If you're a big kid, if you're one of the small pilots, they're probably going to be able to stick almost three, maybe even 4 fingers in there. So if you have to adjust that, just loosen the axle nut on the opposite side, and you can adjust your adjuster blocks. And you do have sight marks on both sides too to keep everything true and square. So that's definitely going to help things out for you. Okay, one of the things that we need to talk about is tires. So give your pilot the best advantage out there. Start the season out with some good fresh tires. That way they're going to be able to bite in there and get a little more competitive on on those situations when they're really trying to charge ahead. If they're just out bouncing around in the weeds, I see a lot of folks come in and they'll say, well, let's just put a tube in it and call it good. Well, unfortunately, the entire tire is completely bald on the outside, and they're just going to be spinning their wheels out there and really struggling in their situation. So if you can, get a fresh set of tires on that bike, and then they're going to feel a lot more confident on the bike. It's not going to feel a little loose and slippy, and they can definitely do a lot more on it. One thing we want to make sure on our rear suspension on our shock is that we're not starting to lose maybe the shock bushings are starting to go a little south. Those are those little pivot points up in the swing arm and up in the upper area of the frame as well. So a good way to tell if the bushings are starting to go a little south is if the bike's sitting there, you can actually just walk up to the bike, give a little lift up, and if you start seeing a lot of play, this one's fine. You're not feeling any knocking or anything like that, and actually try to get the back end off the bike, and you can feel that as well. If you can, maybe take a little lift up on the back tire and you can see if there's a little knocking sound or a little knocking feel. If you're starting to feel a bunch of that and it just doesn't feel quite smooth, it's definitely time to replace those bushings and or at least get them checked out and lubricated. So one of the things we definitely want to maintain is our air filter. This is actually the biggest cause of engine failure we see running through the shop is not maintaining your air filter properly. So a rule of thumb is if they're out racing that day, as soon as you get home or before you start that next race weekend, that filter needs to get cleaned. I talk to a lot of my clients. I always use the analogy is how would you feel if you were running a marathon with your face stuck in a bowl of dirt? That's actually what you're asking the bike to do when you don't clean the air filter. And honestly, I know how much people invest into these machines. This is the biggest way to destroy one of these if you're not maintaining the filter properly. So a lot of them, very simple setup. This is actually our newest updated style of filter. So basically pull it out of the bike itself. You're gonna remove the cage, spray it down with filter cleaner, or we have actually got, I've got some of the F3 here. This works out amazing. Basically pour this in a bowl. I think I've done a demo on this before. Pour it in a bowl, take your filter, squish it in about 6-8 times, take it out, wash it out with hot water, and it comes out pretty spotless on that. So make sure that you're getting all the areas here that are clean. Maybe there's some crust inside here. Maybe you've got even some crud inside the air box as well. So if you're using a grease on your air filter to seal it, this does get mucked up pretty quickly. So I would recommend cleaning it out occasionally. I've pulled some of these out and they've used so much grease to seal the base of their filter that it just gets horrible in here, and then it actually starts pulling that debris inside the engine. So clean air box, clean air filter, one of the best ways you can protect the engine. And honestly, after every race weekend, my filter gets clean. I keep a spare just in case I need it. Maybe I have a water situation where maybe that filter got wet or whatnot. So that way you've always got one on hand. So hopefully that helps out, gang. Biggest way to protect your investment out there.